Welcome to Medicine, Motherhood, and Missions, the podcast where we dive deep into impactful and inspiring conversations with amazing professionals who've turned their challenges into stepping stones for success. I'm Johanna, your host, and each time we meet, we'll explore the stories and journeys of remarkable individuals who are PAs, doctors, professionals, mothers, and mission-driven changemakers, from the halls of the hospitals to the hearts of our homes, and into the communities we serve. Join us as we uncover the challenges, triumphs, and everything in between, and see life through each other's perspective. If you're seeking fulfillment in your career and life, I've got something special for you too. Download our free guide on how to be a fulfilled provider. It's packed with tips and insights to help you thrive while balancing the many hats you wear. And for all those parents out there dreaming big while raising little ones, check out Little Evie's Big Dreams children's book series, available now on Amazon. These heartwarming stories inspire kids to chase their own dreams, just like you're chasing yours. So grab your favorite cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for uplifting conversations that will leave you inspired and equipped to make a greater impact. Let's jump in. Hi friends, I am so excited to have today's guest, Josh Wageman. He is a living example that faith and science are not opposites. They're allies. Josh holds a doctorate in physical therapy, a master's in physician assistant studies from Yale, and a PhD focused on lipid disturbances in Alzheimer's diseases. Josh recently authored and published The Home Security System and the Lipid Neighborhood, Un-Complicating Cholesterol and Cardiovascular Disease. He's a clinical lipid specialist, educator, author, and former collegiate athlete. And through it all, he's remained deeply rooted in his faith. In this conversation, we're going to explore what it is to really look at carrying that faith into academia, medicine, research, and leadership. How do we stay grounded in spiritual truths while navigating the pressures of evidence-based professions? What gets in the way? And how can we influence others, not just with knowledge, but with wisdom, humility, and purpose? Whether you're in healthcare, higher education, or simply wrestling with how to integrate faith into your work, this episode will encourage you to think deeper, stand firmer, and hopefully live more boldly. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very, very excited about this and looking forward to this conversation that's about to unfold.
Yeah, it's a unique conversation. I know you've been on a lot of different podcasts talking about your book and your academic experience and how that has led to lipid and being a lipid research and being a clinical lipid specialist. But this one's going to take us a little different route into faith and science. But first, tell us about your academic and professional path. What connected all of those different phases from, PA to athletics, physical therapy, research, pharma?
Yeah, so God's providence is interwoven throughout all my endeavors. And I would say that my background is quite unique, which is probably a euphemism for bizarre because it's quite unusual. But so honestly, I was an athlete all growing up, and I originally played college baseball, actually. And then I ended up running cross country and track after I injured my shoulder. And athletics were my idol, quite frankly. And athletics are beautiful. I coach cross country still, and I try to stay young and hopefully be able to handle myself when we play pickup basketball, when I'm playing with the youth kids and things like that. But it was really an idol for me all growing up, and I had to be humbled and really shattered in order to definitely make sure that my priorities were in the right place. And it was actually during my first foray into grad school, which was PT school. And quite frankly, the reason I went to physical therapy school was because I had extra eligibility to run cross country and track. And so that's very, very shallow reasons, but that's why I was doing that. And that's where I was at the time. And I got very, very sick. And long story short, no one could really figure it out. And I even had to withdraw from physical therapy school for a semester. And that was really interesting for me because I had really taken for granted all the things that I had been able to do and accomplish both academically and athletically. And really, I failed I mean, I basically had to take a medical withdrawal. I couldn't keep up in class. I got so sick that I could barely go up a flight of stairs without passing out for about a year, actually, and had some really complicated endocrinological phenomena going on that people were really puzzled by. And it's what I needed. It was a very painful year, but during that year, I went back and I worked with special needs kids and reevaluated my perspective and confessed to God that I had been a poor steward of all the amazing things He had given me. And I really wasn't sure what I was going to do at that time. At that point, I entertained going into full-time ministry. I entertained going back to PA school at that time. I entertained going to med school. And eventually, I actually ended up going back and finishing PT school. And that was a huge blessing. And being able to be involved in anybody's life in whatever capacity it is, with whatever you've had the privilege of learning along the way, God always blesses those endeavors. But there was never a sense of finality that I was done with school. And honestly, I have very few useful skills in this life except going to school and taking tests. And so anyway, I worked as a physical therapist for years and saw thousands of patients, and that was awesome. But I ended up going back to the Yale School of Medicine for PA school because I was like, okay, well, I fell in love with biochemistry and endocrinology during the time I got sick, and God uses those trials to catalyze what you're supposed to do when you grow up. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll do this PA school thing. This is pretty cool, and it was awesome. It was fun, super enjoyable, and I ended up practicing as a PA for several years. And it's actually kind of funny because I wish I had a good humanitarian reason for becoming a lipid specialist, but it's actually because I had a patient cancel one day, and I'm always reading stuff. I read voraciously everything from the Brothers Karamazov to the Journal of Clinical Lipidology and everything in between. And I feel like all of those various influences help me as a writer. But anyway, so I was reading something, and there was this article, and it was titled Basics of Lipoproteins, something obnoxiously condescending like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm pretty good at biochemistry. So, how hard can this stuff be? And I read this article that was supposed to be a rudimentary review of cholesterol homeostasis. And I barely understood any of it. And it made me mad. So I was like, okay, well, that's unacceptable. So anyway, so I poured myself into lipids, and I've been blessed to learn a lot of stuff about lipids. And what's awesome is I learn new things every day about lipids. And one of the privileges of this journey that God gives us is the capacity to learn and explore what He has created and give you some insight into the ultimate designer himself and all of the amazing, elegant, sometimes esoteric biochemical signaling pathways that go into the human machine just testifies to how incredible the Creator is. And so anyway, so I invested myself in lipids. There's a board exam you can take. And so that's why I'm a lipid specialist. And then I couldn't help myself because once again, very few useful skills, going to school, taking tests, into studying cholesterol disturbances and Alzheimer's disease. And and I completed my PhD on that topic. And if you think lipids below the brain is fun, you get into the brain, that's a real trip. So anyway, so I've been blessed to learn a bunch of stuff, and I'm an adjunct professor at multiple medical institutions. I do work as a medical science liaison for a biotech company, which has nothing to do with our discussion today. I always make sure to keep that siloed so that the thought police don't come after me, and just have a whole bunch of really, really cool opportunities to meet really cool people, and hopefully along the way, people can learn something from me and I can learn something from them. And then we can all have fun exploring this wonderful world that we've been given.
Yeah. So a couple of things that stood out was, first and foremost, of course, like how you talked about that process of 1 year of going through an illness that was so difficult to identify in a previously really healthy young male, college age. And then you're struck with this difficulty, comes out of the blue. And what was your mindset to overcome and keep going forward instead of getting down on yourself and try identifying with the disease process?
Yeah. So really, anybody who says that God never gives you anything that you can't handle is wrong and has never been fully shattered. God does give you situations that are far beyond what you can overcome in your own strength. But that's when he puts you on his shoulders and he carries you through. And he puts people in your lives during those times to help you navigate those trials. And trials either make you bitter or they make you better. And then you realize that, yeah, you might be too weak to overcome this on your own. And that's exactly what God wants you to learn from those things. And for people who have had a lot of success, whether it's academically, whether it's vocationally, whether it's athletically, whether it's a combination of all those things, sometimes you feel like you in your own strength can just decide you're going to do this and you're going to achieve that. That's how I was my whole life. Mind over matter, I thought, because God blessed me with a pretty functional mind. Matter wins sometimes. And God taught me that. And he had to teach me some hard lessons and have some permanent scars from just my own stubbornness of trying to do things in my own strength. And I realized that it is only through him that I'm able to achieve anything. In 2 Corinthians, we are called earthen vessels, and that is a euphemism for chamber pots. We are all just these clay pots that really, in and of ourselves aren't worth much. Because we know what chamber pots were for. But God's glory is able to be manifested through these earthen vessels, not because of anything we've done, but because of what he has already accomplished. And that's what I learned from that. And, I always say God will always give you the strength to accomplish what he wants to accomplish through you. And I rest on those promises because he has a 100% track record.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I just had a discussion with another guest who was talking about the belief systems that we identify with that ultimately direct the way in which we live our lives. And that conversation wasn't as faith-based, but I think, like, as you said, and for me, myself, I know that faith belief system is so key to not eliminating or obfuscating the problems or difficulties we're facing at the time, but allowing us to hold on to something greater than ourselves, which is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And, just ignoring the issue doesn't make it go away, right? And this is
Yeah.
why, a lot of my patients, because I kind of got this reputation for being thorough, we'll say, in my
Mhm.
cardiometabolic workups, which is a good thing. But sometimes people would be like, oh, I don't want to come get labs from you because you're going to, find all these things wrong with me. I'm like, well, yeah, but just identifying it didn't mean that it wasn't there to begin with, right? And
Yeah.
whenever I would order a coronary artery calcium score, so a CAC,
Mhm.
got plaque, get a
Yeah.
CAC is one of my catchphrases in my book.
Yes.
Not knowing doesn't make it go away, right? You
Mhm.
might have a coronary tree chock full of plaque. Well, just because we got the test to identify it, now we can do something about it, doesn't mean that it wasn't there to begin with. And so there's a big difference between just acknowledging, hey, this is the reality around us, but also it's actionable to go to the one
Mhm.
who can actually help you get through whatever trial, whatever adversity you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely taking action in our faith. Also, as you brought it to a practical level, taking action is what you can do only if you identify and deal with the problems that you're facing. And so, going forward, though, I also wanted to discuss, you focused on Alzheimer's disease, and then you mentioned, you're doing the PhD, and then in your book, it was really interesting to me because the whole problem or that you discussed regarding Alzheimer's is the elimination process, the whole entire process of lipid metabolism and everything with lipids is part of the issue of what may contribute to the development of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
that's a great topic. And so, in general, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. But there are some
mhm,
particular nuances when it comes to cholesterol transport in the brain in the
mhm,
context of neurodegeneration. And when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. For me, everything looks like a lipid disease. But Alzheimer himself first identified
mhm,
toxic lipid droplets in the brains of those with cognitive impairment when he was determining, the disease state that we now know as Alzheimer's disease. So I do
mhm,
think that it is a lipid disease secondary to impairments in substrate utilization, i.e., glucose utilization primarily in the brain. But I think to help color the commentary, to backtrack just a hair for the listeners here, my framework for not having heart attacks, strokes, and down the line dementia throughout my book is the home security system and the lipid neighborhood. So what I say is, for everybody who does not want to have heart attacks, strokes, and dementia, I want you to have a great home security system, and I want you to live in a safe lipid neighborhood. Your home security system has 4 basic pillars: normal blood sugar, normal blood pressure, keep inflammation low, and don't smoke or do drugs, because those are bad. But then your lipid neighborhood, that's your cholesterol panel, because every ApoB containing particle, the vast majority of those being LDL particles, is potentially a criminal that can infiltrate your arterial abode. And then the Lp(a) particles, if you pick the wrong parents with that genetic lipoprotein, well, those are the felons, because per particle, they're about 6.5 times to cause mischief in your artery wall than your run-of-the-mill LDL particle. And so we always, on our annual checkups, get our parameters of glucose metabolism checked. We're always checking our blood pressure. Life is not better inflamed than non-inflamed. And then if you're doing drugs, you might consider stopping. Those are bad. But people don't live on paper, do they? Especially when we come to our cholesterol panel. And so it might look like you're living in a rough inner city neighborhood on your blood panel, but do we have better ways that can inform our decision-making process when it comes to identifying cardiovascular disease, and if present, taking action about that rather than waiting for it to get worse? We do. And so that comes to one of my catchphrases: got plaque, get a CAC. It's the colonoscopy of the heart without the nasty pregame show, because you lay down and a low-dose CT says, hey, have you been broken into or not? Because you cannot have atherosclerosis without an ApoB containing lipoprotein, or a mailman, as they call them, going rogue and running his truck in your arterial wall. And so if you've been broken into, do you want to keep living in the same rough lipid neighborhood that got you broken into? Or do you maybe want to consider moving to a nice, safe, gated community with fewer lipid criminals? Makes sense, right? But another way, if you have any plaque in your coronaries, do you want that plaque stable or unstable? Well, probably stable, particularly since 2/3 of events happen in a vulnerable plaque that ruptures, and then you're 100% occluded. And then can we potentially even further stabilize that plaque and then regress that plaque volume with our available tools in our toolbox? Yeah, we can. So, understanding these things and identifying things, not knowing doesn't make them go away. But if we can identify these things before somebody has the big one, then we can take a preventive approach to these things and, make sure that we can optimize your quality of life and make sure that we can be adding life to your years in the process. And so that's my whole framework for cardiovascular disease. And throughout the book, I dispel a lot of misconceptions when it comes to cholesterol, because it's hard to know what to believe. Because, there'll be some shirtless influencer today saying that, cholesterol is, everybody should have LDL cholesterols of 600. And then, tomorrow it'll be like, oh, eggs are the worst food you could ever eat. And so it's hard to know what to believe as a consumer. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's important to go back to the biochemistry that the good Lord hath ordained in order to clear things up. And that way, hey, we can have some common ground here. And we can focus on the biochem because God made that. And, God doesn't design the clinical trials. And then even people who are suspicious that it's a big pharma conspiracy or something like that, we can look at the biochemistry, and then we can see, hey, does the data that we can ascertain from clinical trials, does the data we can ascertain from genetics, does the data we can ascertain from other sorts of scientific experiments correlate with what we understand that God himself created? Hey, and then if it does, well, then we're cool, right? And so I think that that's really what I try to do throughout the book. And I give us a framework that makes sense. And, anytime that, sleep, exercise, and eating healthy are the answers, I feel pretty confident that, we're on the right track there, no matter what question was asked. So anyway, that's what I go into throughout the book. And my goal is for people to laugh a little, learn a little, and then come away with a relatable framework for not having cardiovascular events and down the line dementia at the end of the day.
Yeah. And it's amazing that you even, took the time to write this book. And I must say, the book is so well written, and it will capture you. Like, literally, I contacted Josh maybe a week or two ago when I bought the book, and I almost finished it in the last 2 weeks. So it is relatively an easy read, but there is a lot of technical jargon there, but it captures you. And it's such a great book to read for the layman and the professional. And so that brings me to like even just research, writing, academia. You've taught at Yale, Idaho State, and many other academic institutions. How has your view of God expanded or deepened through your scientific training and clinical experience?
Yeah, so first off, I'm just very blessed to have been able to teach and also to attend these various institutions. I think learning is such a privilege. And, when
Mhm.
kids are like, oh, I have to go back to school, it's like, no, you get to go back to school.
Yeah.
College is the best. That's why I went forever. So, anyway, embracing that and knowing that this is a really cool time in your life
Mhm.
where you literally get to learn. I mean, come on, this is remarkable. So, anyway,
Yeah.
most of life is just about your perspective, and your experience is whether it's good or bad or positive or negative is often just related to your attitude in the whole process.
Mhm.
And so I think
Yeah.
first off, it's such a privilege to be able to learn things and continue to learn things. So anyway, so as far as my experience with these various institutions, uh, you know, some of these institutions like Yale, when people are like, oh, you went to Yale, and I'll be wearing a Yale sweatshirt around, and people are like, did you really go to Yale? I'm like, actually, yes, and then we can talk about that. And it's kind of funny. But, really, I think that having, the Ivy League degree does open up some doors that might not otherwise be opened, just to have conversations that you might want to have, whether it be clinically, academically, vocationally. So that's good. But these institutions and especially medical programs, you're pretty much taught the same sort of thing. Maybe you get some superstar lectures pulled in at the Yale School of Medicine that you wouldn't have the opportunity to have somewhere else. But really, I mean, if you're in med school, step one is pretty much the same across the board wherever you go, whether you're in
Yeah.
PA school, MP school. The didactic approach is pretty similar across the board.
Yeah.
And regardless of where you're at, I've found that lipid education is sorely lacking.
Mhm.
And, most people are taught LDL bad, HDL good. Everyone take a statin. And that's why we have anti-nausea medications, because there's a lot more to it than that. And that's what I spend a lot of my book dispelling some of those notions. And so anyway, so I've learned that, and I loved all the academic institutions that I was a part of, and yet most of what I've had the privilege of learning since then has been on my own, or through other mentors, rather than the actual when I was in whatever degree program I was in at the time when it comes to lipids. And so yeah, it's all good. And ultimately, learning all these things along the way has just further strengthened my faith in God, because really it's so complicated, especially when you get into lipids, and especially lipids in the brain. It's like, oh wow, the intricacy is just beautiful, and we're called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind.
Mhm.
And really, I think that when you are given a little bit of a picture into the insights of the ultimate creator himself, it just gives you that much more appreciation and that sense of awe about what God has designed. And it's amazing that anything goes right once you study all these the intersection of all these biochemical signaling pathways. And so, you could take the stance that all this is, kind of a lucky thing that happened and exploded, and now it's all working right, and we're propagating progeny, sort of, I guess, and those sort of things. Or you can just take a step back and just in awestruck wonder say, wow, thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to explore what you have designed. We won't ever know the exact ins and outs to the degree that God knows, but to be able to even understand a little bit of it is humbling and such a cool experience. And then beyond that, we are able to be the conduits through which his blessings flow, and through which hopefully his message of grace can be disseminated to a world that likes to reject the creator, as Romans 1 says, but ultimately would be wise to acknowledge that life doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless there is an absolute sovereign outside of the box in which we live who wound it up and who promises to make it all right in the end.
Yeah, but do you ever feel that tension in that academic or medical environments where, that tension in faith and science? And because there's very few people, it seems like sometimes in those environments that where faith supersedes science, so to speak,
Yeah. And so there's always a tension in being in the world but not of it.
Mhm.
And I think that what we have to remember too is that science itself does not say anything. Science is a set of tools that we can use to hopefully make better sense of what we see all around us. And so science by definition is observable, testable, and repeatable. And science is a set of tools that the creator himself has given us to better understand what he outside of our box has created for us inside of it. And so, with that perspective, I don't think you have to contradict yourself. And you can utilize those tools in order to have a better appreciation. And ultimately, I think love him deeper because you appreciate so much what he has designed. That said, you know, you might end up being the minority at certain times in certain circles. However, when you do the best you can, and I think an example of this is like Daniel and his friends in Babylon, right? They were the best students that there were, and they were not drinking the Kool-Aid of King Nebuchadnezzar. They weren't even eating from his table, and they're like, hey, we want to just have veggies that haven't been sacrificed to pagan idols here, and God's going to sustain us. And he did. And they were the best of the best. They were the best students there were. And yeah, did they learn about, all the various Chaldean gods and all these things that they didn't, believe in or worship? Sure. And they stood out and they were leaders in that pagan society. And ultimately, Nebuchadnezzar gave his life to Christ. And of course, God was the one who changed his heart. But I think that Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego must have had a pretty profound impact on him, just as they were resolutely committed to their faith, even when they were going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And so I think that's a good example for us. You can excel in academia. You can have a reputation as an expert in your field. You can continue to explore these things and teach these things, and people will probably respect that, especially when you have demonstrated transcendence in whatever field that is. However, you can still stay resolutely committed to the author and perfecter of our faith and the ultimate arbiter of absolute truth, and have confidence that the science that I love, and I love speaking about, I can be confident that, my conclusions and my observations are rational, because I've been created in God's image myself. And so anyway, I think it all works together beautifully. However, there's always an insidious temptation to maybe not be as outspoken about your faith, because it's like, ooh, what are people going to think? Are they going to just blow me off? And that could happen. That said, that's where building relationships becomes critical. And so, because if people truly know that you care about them as a person, I think they're more likely to listen to what you have to say when it comes to matters of eternal consequence. And so, part of the way I wrote the book and the way that I do, I make allusions, to my faith throughout it. But I wait till the conclusion to truly give what I think is a beautiful metaphor of metabolic health for spiritual wellness till the very end. Just because hopefully in reading the book, you see, oh, yeah, this guy's kind of funny and I think he's genuine. And then maybe you'll be more likely to hear me out on the ultimate home security that goes beyond this temporal realm in which we live. So that's why I did that. And I think with anything, if you go around and people can evangelize on the streets, there are multiple ways that God can bless a willing heart. If your desire is to share the gospel, right? But going around with a Bible and, whacking somebody on the head and saying, hey, you're eternally condemned. And which, and for all of us, we're all sinners. God's standard is perfection and none of us meet that standard, but which that might be true. But, it's not probably the best way. I think, people are a lot more likely to hear what you have to say when you've built a relationship with them. And the same goes into the clinic, right? Sometimes patients would come to me and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this cardiologist, he was the worst. He told me this. And then I would just listen, and then we would have some fun, and we'd talk about their lives and their kids and everything else. And then sometimes I would actually propose the same exact intervention whether it be pharmacologically, lifestyle wise, or both, that the cardiologist who they hated had proposed. And they're like, oh, that sounds great. What was it though? It was because we had built a relationship. The words that that person were saying may have been true or accurate, but it's the way in which you go about it that I think matters. And if you're genuine and you truly show that person that, hey, I care about you, I want what's best for you, from not only a physical health standpoint, but from eternal perspective. Hey, they might disagree with you when it comes to your faith in God or anything else like that, but I do think that you can still be on good terms with those people. And I feel like too, because I have lots of friends who disagree with me, and people who profess to be atheists. I would say agnostic if you're honest, because I think that if you are an atheist, you have to acknowledge that there's a possibility that there is a deity out there that you do not know about who exists, unless you yourself are omniscient. And if you're claiming that, then I think we're dealing with narcissism. But so those are conversations that I love to have, and ultimately, it's more comfortable for all of us to just hang out with people who agree with us, right? It's comfortable with people who are, in conservative Christian cultures to just hang out with those people. It's comfortable for people who, genuflect at the altar of academia to just hang out with those people who will agree with you and drink your Kool-Aid no matter what you say. But I actually think it's healthy to have conversations with people who may not share your ideological viewpoint. That's good. That makes you better. And it helps further refine your faith. And then, maybe you do question certain things that you think you believe, and you work through those things, and then you emerge even stronger than before. And so I think that all these things go together, and there's always that balance. But never for 1 second have I ever been like, ooh, maybe I'm just totally off on this stuff as far as what God has worked in my life. Once he's got you, right? And he can't let you go. And so that's a beautiful thing. And like Peter says in John 6, everybody, they wanted a Messiah of their own creation. Jesus, fed the 5,000 and was doing all these miracles and was making their lives really comfortable. And that was what they wanted. They wanted a Messiah to deliver them from Roman oppression. They didn't acknowledge that they needed a savior from their sins. And so Jesus tells, hey, I know you want some free food, but you need the bread of life. And that's me. That's why I came. And they're like, oh, that's annoying. Yeah. And so everybody leaves. And so Jesus turns to Peter and he's like, so how about you, man? And Peter said a lot of dumb stuff, but here's where he nailed it. He's like, where else am I going to go? He said, you alone have the words of eternal life. Where else would I go? Yeah. Where else am I going to go? Basically I'm in the same boat as the, agnostic who is never really sure of anything. And, ultimately whatever reasons you have for doing whatever you're doing, whether it be altruistic or otherwise, I think you have to just kind of create your own truth at that point. And that's a tough thing to do. Whereas we can submit to the arbiter of absolute truth, and not only know the truth intellectually, but know the truth on a personal level. That's where life can be pretty special. And then you can, the pressure's off. You can have fun exploring all these wonderful things that he's created.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what the important thing you mentioned is, just even, in work environments, wherever you are, it's building that trust. And as you said, even as medical professionals, like we're building trust with patients in order for them to believe that we have the in, best in store for them and best that we want for them. And so that trust in relationships, to be able to influence others or even speak to others and hear their perspectives, as you said, that's so key. And that's why I do this podcast, just also to hear other people's perspectives, journeys and stories. And because we can't live in a bubble, we can't live just in our own ideologies and get stuck, because then we can develop maybe unofficial Christian ideologies, so to speak, if we get too stuck without opening up ourselves, as you said, to refine our faith, to really understand what is our faith, what are we believing in, who are we trusting in, and, how, we can't be refined if we can't face the fire too, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so you have to go through the fire, or you have to be able to know what you're preaching. And you can only do that if you're actually meeting and talking and interacting with other people and understanding what the questions are in order to answer. But that brings me also to integrity and influence. And sometimes no matter where you are, environments that may be skeptical of faith, you know, um, how do you stay rooted in your faith and integrity? And also, in academia or different places, seeing lack of integrity or having, what is your perspective on integrity in academia and medical professionals, leadership, and even just staying true to integrity with yourself? Like, how do you maintain that balance?
Yeah. So I think what makes it somewhat easy is I answer to God ultimately for what I do, wherever I'm at.
Hmm.
And so, I'm not going to kowtow to any sort of human institution. I'm going to respect the human institutions. I've been, those institutions have been placed there by God Himself. However, I'm never going to compromise my moral integrity, regardless of where I'm at. That said, sometimes I can be an island. You can kind of feel lonely.
Hmm.
You can kind of feel like Elijah when he was running away from Jezebel in the Old Testament, and he's like, God, just kill me now. I'm the only one left. That's how you can feel when you're in the medical field, whether you're in the pharmaceutical industry, when you're around a bunch of people who are ultimately, as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, are chasing the wind. Good luck catching that. But that's what they're doing. Everybody is trying to ascend this hierarchy, and try to step on whoever it takes to get to the next rung in society. And when you're not driven by those things, it can be a little lonely. It can be discouraging at times. And yet that's why we find each other. That's why we find what I call the remnant. There is always a remnant of people who share that faith system, and you find them. We found each other, right? And when you are willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, this is who I am, everything I've been given, and all the opportunities and the faculties I've been given and the expertise I may have is a gift from the ultimate giver. Hey, the people will find you. The people who share that. Some people will just be like, oh yeah, whatever, that guy or whatever, and maybe mutter some things under their breath, or maybe they won't, just because they know that whatever they learn about lipids, they learn from me. So maybe they'll be nice. But really, you find the people, and
Hmm.
ultimately, I mean, that's where I stand. And so the same conversations I have with people at academic institutions, the same people that I interact with at various medical conferences. I have the same sorts of conversations with random people in airports, or people who I meet in the grocery store. And I think that not compartmentalizing so much our lives into, oh, now we're in academia mode. Oh, now we're in theological mode. No, they're inextricably intertwined, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think that, it's similar to our what we do from a health perspective. It's not like, oh, I exercised once and now I'm good. I mean, you're going to do that every day throughout the rest of your life. I got good sleep one night, so I'm good now. No, you have to consistently get good sleep, or else you're going to be a metabolic atrocity. Oh, yeah, that one day I really cleaned my diet up that one day. Well, congrats. So all of the things that we do consistently. I brushed my teeth once. Well, yeah, okay, hopefully more than once that day. So all the things that we do from our just physical hygiene and from our
Mhm.
physical health, that should carry over into our spiritual health as well. God
Mhm.
tells us to pray once. That time that you cried out to God to forgive you for your sins. No, pray without ceasing. Right? Are we supposed to maybe fellowship here and there, be a Sunday Christian? No, we're continually immersing ourselves with our brothers and sisters in Christ, and God's word. You're not going to have a very good relationship with somebody if you never speak to them. And how does God communicate to us? Through His word, and we communicate to Him via prayer. So if we're not having those things as consistent parts of our spiritual lives, we're not really going to stay strong there either. And so I think that it's consistency. when we're called to take up our crosses, it wasn't a one-time affair. It's take up your crosses daily. And just like you're going to be committed to physical health, if that's part of your life, you're going to continue doing the same things over and over and over again. Yep, that works. Same thing from a spiritual standpoint. If you're not consistently doing those things, then yeah, you're going to feel more distant from God. But at that point, who changed? It wasn't him. So you have to reevaluate what you're doing on a personal level.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think, as you said, it's all about living daily, and it's not a separate or compartmentalization of yourself. How can you compartmentalize yourself? You can't be one thing in one way and another in another way. Then that's hypocritical. And so it's all about living true all the time, right? And I think that's how we can um, be more impactful in our communities as well, if we are being true to ourselves all the time, and in our faith, and allowing that continually daily practice and renewal in asking, the Holy Spirit, and just prayer and daily routines that help us continue in our faith too, right? Um, and so I know, I just also wanted to touch on your leadership and impact in youth. Um, and because we were talking initially in our first meeting about your activity with youth, and I thought it was really interesting how your perception of the current difficulties that youth face today, that we may not have faced when we were kids. And how does that kind of like get in the way of maybe their mindsets or their faith? Because we have seen a huge decline as kids get to high school, and especially when they get to college, their decline in their faith, or their attendance in church just drops off. And so how do we prevent that? What have you seen in your work with youth?
Yeah. And I've had it's kind of amazing because I've, had the huge blessing of doing all these academic things and whatnot. And the one thing I didn't go
Mhm.
to school for was to actually like do youth ministries. And I've been doing the youth
Yeah.
ministries for 13 years at our church out in Boise, Idaho. So that's kind of funny. It was kind of a here I am, send me sort of thing. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, I'll do this until you find a permanent replacement, and then ended up being me. So anyway, so that's been a huge, consistent, surprising blessing all along. That said, Christianity is not genetic, or whatever, faith system you have is not just, oh, my
Yeah,
parents are this, so I'm that. No, I
exactly.
mean, just because you're in a garage doesn't mean
Mhm.
you're a car. Just because you're in
Exactly.
a church doesn't make you a Christian, or whatever else, whatever kind of church you're in. And so, that it's important to have that personal relationship. And also, for any of us, it's important to have ownership of what you believe yourself, not just, oh, well,
Mhm.
I heard this from somebody. And that's why I'm not big on algorithms clinically, because it's like, okay, well, do you understand the individual utility of each biomarker? Do you understand why you're doing what you're doing? Or are you just doing this because consensus says? Well, consensus might be wrong, now consensus also might be right, but it's important for you to have an understanding of what you're doing, whatever it is, whether it be from a religious standpoint, whether it be from, whatever you're doing from a clinical perspective. Yeah, let's have a good reason for doing what we're doing. And, ultimately, that's super important for any of us. And so, because what we see is, these kids who grow up in the church, and then they leave the church. Well, did they ever have a personal relationship with Christ? Well, probably not. And so, it's good, to immerse the kids in the right environment, I guess, but it's no guarantee. And what's interesting today is there's a lot more influences that we didn't have to deal with when we were growing up, as far as like social media, as far as just the ubiquity of smartphones, which ironically I think make people less smart, because this generation is constantly being bombarded by external stimuli, and they almost like crave it. And so everybody's always got a phone, always got a phone. Instead of talking to the person next to you, you're texting them. That's absolutely outrageous, but that's what we see all the time. We see people at Starbucks on a date and they're both just on their phones. It's like, well, this is too bad. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting. And so we have this constant, need almost, or it's almost an addiction of having these constant, our minds flooded by inputs. And yet when you're getting constantly bombarded by something external, I think it actually kind of saps your creativity over time. And it leads to this insidious inability actually to de novo synthesize your own thoughts. Because part of being a kid is like just going out in the backyard and messing around, and you find something and you play around, and and you create games. And I mean, one of the best places ever is like the old abandoned PE closet with all the balls and all the random things. It's like, ooh, what game could we create out of this? That's so cool. And that's how we grew up. We were always running around. Nowadays it's like, kids are sitting on their phone, and then if they need to go charge their phone, it's like, oh, I'm bored. It's like, well, that's lame. And so anyway, so it's interesting, and that's not just the spiritual component, but it's also, I think that one of the gifts that God gives us is creativity and thinking. And I just feel like when you're getting told what to think, whether it be from Instagram or whether it be from whatever other source, you're not learning to actually think on your own. And if something that is either your religious system or whatever platform that you're operating on, if it's not your own and it's just because somebody else said something, yeah, the moment that somebody questions your ideology or your framework, you're going to fold, and that's not what we want. And so I just think that one of my one of my little catchphrases is, I want to create groups of thinkers, not imbibe at the chalice of groupthink. Groupthink is not thinking. It's just going along with consensus. And that doesn't really get you very far. And that ultimately, I think, is a house of cards. And so anyway, in that rambling tangent, I just think it's important to have your own personal faith, your own personal framework, your own personal reason for doing whatever it is you're doing, not just, riding on the coattails of somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. Because that curiosity, and it goes back to what we were talking about, even in the academic or professional environments, that, opening ourselves to be able to be in these places that we can like think critically and be curious and see the differences, but also understand what we truly believe in. And as you say, if you don't have a strong faith or belief system, the moment you face something difficult, as you said, the house of cards is going to fall down because you just believed what other people are believing instead of really understanding it for yourself and understanding what that faith means to you. And so I also was um, thinking like, so how, because you have a daughter, how do you practically kind of help your daughter or guide her in her faith and kind of prevent these group thinks or help her kind of encourage the curiosity in her life?
Yeah, so my daughter, she's 8 years old, and she has a beautiful, beautiful mind. She has a very unique way of observing the world. And I've hung out with a lot of kids, thousands of kids. I love hanging out with kids, across all the spectra. And I have never met a kid who is wired quite like her. And that's not a bad thing. I just think there's great potential for really beautiful things to be created there. And she's just so incredibly creative herself. She writes her own novels. She writes her own stories and illustrates them, and makes these really elegant art projects based on her own what's going on in her mind. She calls it the mindset process. It's
Oh,
it's pretty wild, and it's kind of Inside Out. I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, which I
yeah.
think is very
Yes, I have a little
clever.
daughter too, so
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
it has flavors of that, but it's also her own. It's really actually quite vivid and beautiful. And that's how it really helps her navigate her own, navigating her own mind. Her mind is a beautiful place, but there are lots of connections and lots of wires in there. A lot of kids, I feel like if there were like electrical outlets, there's like four of them. And it's like, okay, let's plug that one in there, plug that one in there, plug that one in. Okay, now let's go run around, right? She's got like 4,000 outlets. And so when you've got that much going on and that much potential for awesome in there, sometimes it's like it can be a little frustrating if one of the wires gets tangled, huh? And so just helping her navigate that and leveraging some of the really amazing, intricate things that's going on in there is kind of our challenge. But yeah, and she's a sweetheart, and just continually rooting her and the foundational biblical framework that I think makes everything make sense. Is what we all try to do as stewards of this amazing gift that God has given us. With children. So that's what we try to do. And it'll be fun to see what God has in store for her. But yeah, you should see some of the stuff she comes up with. Puts the books I write to shame.
Well, we can't wait to see her publishings in the future. And do you have like any practical habits that you encourage your youth to cultivate that deeper curiosity and intellectual independence?
Yeah, I think that just fostering an environment where we are really marinating in the blessings that God has given us, just that constant attitude of gratitude and thankfulness helps immediately get your perspective on the ultimate purveyor of these amazing gifts we get to enjoy. I think when we aren't thankful, that's when our perspective gets off, and then when we're together, when we're isolated, I mean, I know when I'm alone in my own head, I get weird, and so I need people around me so we can have fun, and I can learn from you, you can learn from me, and we can build each other up and encourage each other. This is not supposed to be a solo endeavor, and so I just think help and getting kids excited about learning, exciting about moving, and just honestly excited about life. We've been given this life, and life is such a gift. And ultimately, we are all building our sandcastles on the beach. And we've been given this spot on the beach, and at any point, the tide could come in and wash away everything that we've ever worked for, and every goal that we've ever set, and all these things that we're building. However, that shouldn't stop us from building something cool. And in the process of you building your own sandcastle, maybe you're going to inspire somebody else to build their own. And maybe somebody's going to join you and help you with a part of their sandcastle that you were struggling with. And maybe, just maybe, when the tide comes in, that foundation is going to stay, and somebody else can build on that when all is said and done. And somebody can be inspired by the legacy that you leave. Ultimately, though, we're all living on borrowed time, and we don't know what's going to happen. But the gift itself is the moment, and the gift itself is the people that we're able to spend those moments with. And so whatever the pursuit that you have is, as far as I want to graduate, I want to get this degree, I want to get this job or whatever, it's really the process and enjoying the process and the beauty in the process and the moment itself that matters more than anything. Because once you arrive at whatever, achievement that you have set your mind to, attain, it's kind of anticlimactic. And yet, if you find the beauty in the process and the moments, and honestly, the best thing of being in all these various strata of academia and pharma and medicine is the people I get to meet along the way. When God gives a gift, he wraps it in a person. And ultimately, you can't put a price on that. And so I just think really having that perspective of just thankfulness and, seize the moment, go crush it at life, knowing that ultimately the most important thing that has ever happened in world history, the death and crucifixion of the one innocent person to ever walk this planet, has already occurred, and you can't undo that. And praise God that we can't.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think like you so beautifully ended this conversation and kind of discussed exactly what the whole thing is. We're building sandcastles on the beach, chasing the wind sometimes, and even no matter what accomplishment we come to, there's always another accomplishment, another goal, but we've got to remember what we're here for, and that's to be a part of a community in this world, right? And impact and spark hope wherever we are, right? And I really wanted to have this conversation with you, given the extent of your academic experience. And, even though you're involved in ministry, you're an academic. And so it's great to hear that faith perspective from a professional and someone who has dealt with science and lived in this scientific world, because sometimes we feel there's so much tension and unbelief if we go towards faith versus science, but they can live together, and we can't live without one or the other, but together, right? And thank you so much for coming on this show. Do you have any last words of encouragement or anything else that you'd like to say?
Yeah, just no, thank you so much for having me. And I think this is some record for the least amount of time I've ever spent on a podcast talking about lipids. I mean, this was great. I got my cup filled spiritually here, and so anyway, but if you want more lipids, you can always check out the book, and every single statement I make, in the back, there are hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed articles citing where I got that. And so, yes, faith and science can live together. I think they're inextricably intertwined. And so you can check that out, and just to make sure I'm just not making up stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely check out Josh's book. It's on Amazon, and I'll provide all the links on the show notes once the episode airs. And we look forward to more books in the future, I hope.
Yeah.
And
The
yeah.
audiobook's actually out now.
Oh, yeah.
So if you guys are listening to this, and you're like, wow, I hate this guy's voice. Well, don't do that then. But yeah, so the audiobook is out. And I wasn't originally planning on doing that, but a lot of people are like, oh man, I don't really read books, but I listen to audiobooks. I'm like, okay. When two people said it, I was like, okay, whatever, come on. And then 30 people said it, I was like, okay, well, maybe I should, if that's what the people want. So there's an audiobook there. And then also, I've pretty much written it all. I call it the remixed second edition for the clinician and anyone on a mission for more lipid tuition. Because sometimes I rap about, lipoproteins
Yeah.
and things like that. So anyway, so that's
Mhm.
I've actually written it. It has a lot more. There's a community pool with optional deep dives into physiology. In that edition, topics like the role of thyroid hormones on cholesterol
Yeah.
homeostasis, postmenopausal hormone replacement therapy, testosterone, things that,
Mhm.
those are interesting things too.
Yeah,
So those will
for
be on
sure.
there. And that should, I have to get it formatted and stuff, but I've pretty much written it. And so maybe it'll be at about around Christmas. That would be poignant. Or maybe a little longer. I don't know. We'll see. But that's on the horizon. Just because I think it's fun. It's cathartic for me to write things and tell a story in the process. And so
Yeah.
anyway, so stay tuned.
That's awesome. It's a great read, and I think for any clinician, I look forward to this next book. Um, it's not like reading a textbook, so that's the nice part of it, you know.
Yeah, I enjoy
So
reading textbooks, but I'm weird, and so anyway, it's hopefully you can have some fun with it. So
yeah, yeah. And so, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Josh's journey reminds us that walking with God doesn't mean stepping away from science. It means stepping into it with eyes wide open. As a researcher, educator, and clinician, he's shown us how faith can shape the way we think, teach, serve, and lead. In a culture that often pushes faith to the margins, may we be the ones who bring it back to the center with compassion, excellence, and courage. Let this conversation remind you and me that your faith is not a liability in your profession. It's your foundation. Keep learning, keep growing, keep standing firm in both truth and grace. And as always, spark hope, speak life, and live on purpose. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Medicine, Motherhood, Missions. We hope you found inspiration, insight, and a sense of connection in the stories we shared today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram for updates, free downloads, and to join a community of like-minded individuals passionate about making a difference through medicine, motherhood, and mission work. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Until next time, keep sparking hope, keep healing, keep nurturing, and keep making a difference. This is Johanna signing off from Medicine, Motherhood, Missions. The medical opinions expressed on this podcast are for the informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Always consult a licensed healthcare provider for personal medical questions or concerns. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast host.